Brandon, I want to get into musculoskeletal ultrasound or point of care ultrasound, but I just don't know, which one to buy. And I hope to maybe answer that question with today's video. So first, we have to define some terminology so we're all speaking the same language. Right? Transducer types. Linear transducers, these are normally higher frequency transducers, right? They look like this. They're best for musculoskeletal and more superficial structures. They make a rectangular image, and the image is equal to the width of the probe. So here, linear, the sound beams go like that, just like that. Okay, a curvilinear or a convex probe. This is normally a lower frequency probe. It's best for deeper structures, and it gives a wider field of view, right? Because the sound beams sort of spread out, so the image produced also spreads out. And here is a curvilinear and a sector probe. And a sector probe, sometimes called a phased array probe, although technically all of these are phased array probes. But a sector probe is like a small curvilinear probe, so a very, very small footprint, but still it sends the sound beam in different directions. And this is really useful to see through the ribs. So this is particularly relevant in cardiology if you want to look at the heart. Now there are specialty probes, like endocavity probes. Obviously for MSK, we don't care about that. Hockey stick probes. So hockey stick probes, these are highly specialized probes, typically very high frequency for very superficial structures, and helps for interventional procedures. Right? Because of this shape, you can imagine your other hand is here and the needle's coming in this plane here. Now typically for MSK, frequency-wise, you want greater than 12 megahertz, and you want a linear probe. Musculoskeletal structures tend to be superficial structures. Now, the higher the frequency, the better the resolution, but the worse the penetration. For example, this L15 has like a maximum depth of 7 centimeters. But Clarius has another probe with a lower frequency, and it can see 11 centimeters deep. All right, so the higher frequency your probe is, the worse the penetration depth. Now for deeper structures, or on those who have a lot of adiposity or muscle, you will have to settle on a lower frequency in order to see the structures. Now some cart-based units can sort of compensate for this by increasing power. But if we're talking about handhelds, you don't really have that luxury. Now elements. Now elements and channels, these often get talked about a lot, particularly when you're talking about cheap units out of China. If you're buying an expensive unit or a premium unit from one of the established companies like GE or Philips, you don't really have to pay attention to these numbers, because just know that it's going to be sufficient. But what are the elements? These are the number of PCT elements, producing the sound wave. More elements improves resolution. Cheaper or older units were 80, 96, 128. Newer linear probes should be 192 or greater. Curvilinear probes should be 128 or greater. Now channels. This is the circuitry to create and interpret a signal from an element. The more channels you have, the better the frame rate. The ideal number is 1 channel for each element. Normally, again, this is just a talking point for cheaper ultrasounds. Chinese ultrasounds from around 2020 were typically around 32 channel. Since 2024, newer ones are 64 channels. Premium handhelds like GE are 128 channels. Cart-based units can be even more. Okay, useful features to look for. Multiple probe types. Right? Here is a double-ended probe. So you have 2 probes in one. That's a useful feature. Right, having a dual-ended probe or a cart with 2 different transducers gives you more options. You can do most MSK diagnosis with just a high-frequency linear probe, but having a curvilinear or sector probe is useful if someone's obese, the hip. It's useful for emergency scan protocols like the EFAS protocol, useful for checking for abdominal aortic aneurysms. Right? It is something to consider that even though a linear will do most MSK, having the option of a curvilinear is sort of bonus. Trapezoid mode. So trapezoid mode takes advantage of a concept called beam steering. So even though the probe, a linear probe, will be flat here, the unit can steer the beam towards the sides. So it can create an image similar to that of a curvilinear probe, right? This is super useful if I try to use my Clarius to evaluate for hip joint effusion, for example. In fact, here's a picture of that now. So here is the Chinese Suresult probe using the curvilinear section. This is only 5 megahertz. And here, this is 10 megahertz, so this is much higher resolution, right? And you can see this trapezoid mode. Instead of a rectangle with trapezoid mode, I have a little bit wider field of view as you go deeper. But this is already at its maximum depth of 7 centimeters, and I'm skinny. This is actually my own hip. So whereas this, I could still use this probe on someone who is 200 pounds, 300 pounds. I would not be able to use the Clarius to evaluate their hip just because it doesn't have that depth. Okay, probe width, field of view. Now this is just talking about the physical width, right? So my Chinese probe has a width here of 4 centimeters, and the Clarius, this L15 that I have, has 5 centimeters. So the picture is actually wider. I can see more. This can help find structures. You get a better view of longer structures. So in my opinion, wider is better. More useful features. Split screen, also called a dual screen. I think this is a necessity. This is a necessity for musculoskeletal diagnosis. With this mode, you can have one image of the patient's left and one image of the patient's right, and then you can easily compare the asymptomatic side with the symptomatic side. And for example, kids can look super strange, like pediatrics. So how do you know if what you're looking at is normal or not? Well, if you have split screen, it's easy. You just look on the asymptomatic side, look on the symptomatic side, and see if it looks the same. Compound imaging. In particular, I'm talking about spatial compound imaging because there's multiple types. There's frequency compound imaging, there's time averaging. I want spatial compound imaging if we're talking about musculoskeletal. And this reduces the appearance of anisotropy. Anisotropy is when a tendon or something that's highly reflective looks dark because sound beams bounce off of it and into a direction away from the transducers. What spatial compounding does is it takes multiple pictures using that beam steering, so steering the beam in different directions. And then what it does is it takes all of those images and puts them all together and makes sort of an average picture. And this improves the appearance of tendons in particular. But because of all of that processing and all those images it has to take, it does reduce the frame rate. But you can, of course, turn this feature on and off as needed. Now, power and or color Doppler, this is a necessity. You need at least one of them. Power is more sensitive for flow. Color gives you information about the direction of flow. You need at least one of these because you sometimes need to know if there's increased flow in a region. And it's necessary to help make some diagnoses. Okay, other features. Subscription or not. So many ultrasounds, particularly handheld ultrasounds, basically require a subscription, or the features are hidden behind a subscription. Do you have the money for a subscription? Does that bother you that you need to pay a subscription? These are things you have to factor into your purchase. For example, the Clarius basically requires a $600 per year subscription. I'm not paying it right now, and it has almost no features. It's almost useless now. This Chinese Suresult has no subscription, so I never have to pay for anything. I own it and can use it as long as I want. Think about how you need to save images. DICOM, sometimes it's included in the subscription, sometimes it's included by default, sometimes it needs a second subscription for DICOM. So pay attention to whether it supports DICOM image saving. And in general, how are you saving? Does it save to the cloud? Is there cloud storage? Do you have to connect it with a USB? Is it wireless? Like how does it work to save these images? Next is ease of use. Time to scan. From pressing the power button or grabbing it, how long does it take to get going? With my Suresult, with my setup, it's less than 10 seconds and I'm scanning. I particularly like how fast this is. The app is very simplistic though. Not a lot of fancy features. Pros and cons. Presets. Are there presets that help produce better images? For example, the Clarius, particularly with some of its AI or quote-unquote AI technology, will automatically find the median nerve, highlight it, and measure the cross-sectional area for you. So maybe that's a big selling point for you. So does it have the presets you want and the features that you want like that? Auto settings. The Suresult basically has no automatic settings. It does have a couple presets, but very general presets. So if you want to change the brightness or change the gain and things like that, you have to go in and make all those changes yourself. Whereas the Clarius auto sets the gain and the TGC automatically for you. You don't have to do anything. If you want to change the frequency, you have to press a button on the Suresult. On the Clarius, it changes the frequency automatically. What about bugs or updates? I hate the Clarius that you'll go to use it and it'll say, nope, I need to update right now. Wait. Suresult only updates if you go to the store and download the update off the app. And is it buggy? Suresult app had some bugs I complained about. They fixed them, but the app is made in such a way that some things are a bit too awkward. You could call them bugs. The Clarius, for example, the app works pretty good as you're using it, but then after you're done scanning, like an active scan, it's so super buggy, and the cloud software is so super buggy. So does that play a role in deciding whether to purchase or not? Extra technology that you may come across, elastography, really need to look at, hasn't really proven to be necessary for diagnosis. Extended field of view, this is where you can take the transducer and just slide it along the the patient, and it will create, or it'll stitch together multiple images. So for something really long, like rectus femoris, you would be able to get an image of the entire rectus femoris through this extended field of view setting. Speckle reduction, this is on every single unit will have speckle reduction, but some companies' speckle reduction is better than others. Beam steering, really useful, particularly when using needles, because you can point the beam perpendicular to the needle to make the needle brighter. The Suresult does not do beam steering yet. Maybe they'll add that in an app update, but at the moment it doesn't. Pulsed wave Doppler, you don't really need this type of Doppler. This actually gives you how fast the flow is moving, but for MSK, we don't really care about that. Other things like hands-free voice control, like that's cool, and Clarius offers it, but not necessary for MSK. And of course, there's more. Okay, handheld versus cart-based ultrasound. Now, the convenience of a handheld ultrasound, particularly the wireless ones, cannot be understated. There are experts and specialists who will use their handheld over their other ultrasound units, depending on the scenario, because it's convenient and as I mentioned, wireless, right? It just fits in your pocket. If you can make a diagnosis with something that you're carrying around in your pocket, you don't have to wheel around a machine room to room, why not? If this is good enough to make a diagnosis. And even for procedures, without having to worry about a wire going somewhere, a lot of people will use a wireless one over a better cart unit just so they don't have to mess around with a wire. So I think there are benefits to handhelds even if you have access to a cart-based unit. That being said, are the handhelds as good as a cart-based unit? No. Right? If they were just as good, then why would you pay $100,000 for a cart-based unit when you can spend $5,000 on a wireless one you can put in your pocket, right? Now, in one study, they found there was 65% perfect agreement. That doesn't sound that great. I think the more meaningful part of the study was that this disagreement only affected management 4% of the time. And if you actually look at what they wrote in terms of the discrepancies, they were typically about the extent or type of pathology, a tendinosis versus partial tear, partial thickness versus full thickness tear, etc. So this 4% number, I think, is more telling. And I think even if you had two radiologists using the same machine, I don't think they would get 100% perfect agreement either, because these disagreements, sometimes they both agreed on the diagnosis on the subscapularis. They both agreed on the diagnosis of the supraspinatus. But then maybe the infraspinatus, one person said it was normal and the other person said mild tendinosis, right? Which of course wouldn't change the overall management of that patient. I'd say I agree with this maybe 4% number. I don't think, I think if I upgraded my Clarius to, let's say, a cart-based unit, maybe that would help me 5% of the time, 10% of the time, maybe. but 90% of the time you don't need that level of detail that would justify that cost or inconvenience of wheeling around a cart. So here are some images from that study. So the first two are a Philips Lumify handheld. It goes up to 12 megahertz probe. Then these are from a cart-based unit. And here we have MRI. So A and C are sort of the same image, A, C, and E. So let's look here. Oh yeah, look at that tear. We see cartilage interface sign here. And look, oh, you can still make the diagnosis, right? Similarly here, okay, compare that to this. Yeah, I see the same injury. There's no need for a cart-based unit to make this diagnosis. Now, what if we focus in this region here? All right. Well, we look at the handheld and then we look at the cart-based unit. I see a teeny tiny partial tear in there. And here's where that discrepancies were, right? Now, if a tendon looked like this, I would diagnose a tendinosis, right? A hypoechoic darkened tendon is tendinosis. And then someone with a cart-based unit says, yeah, I see some fiber disruption. I'm going to call that a small partial tear. So that's the type of discrepancy that we're talking about. It does not change management. You would still manage these patients the same. Now, can you trust the measurements? For many diagnoses, you need to take a measurement. Well, probably yes. If you can see it well enough to measure it, then the measurements seem to be accurate. Now, here's just comparing a Clarius to a high-end machine, and the measurements are all in agreement. There's actually no surprise there. We've known for many, many years how to take these sound beams and calculate distances and to record measurements. And they're using the same formulas, like math behind the scenes, to make these calculations. So as long as you circle it correctly on the screen, then you're going to get the same measurements. I'm going to start by talking about 3 handhelds. The TLDR is don't buy a Butterfly and don't buy any of the cheap Chinese ultrasounds with 80 up to 128 elements. They're not worth it. I'm going to start by talking about this comparison of 6 handheld ultrasound devices by point-of-care ultrasound experts. I thought this was an extremely useful study, and I invite you to go there and read the whole study if you're interested. I'll try to summarize the useful information for musculoskeletal sonography. Right? These were point-of-care people. They were interested in the heart, interested in the abdomen, and I was just interested in muscles, right? So they summarized most of their findings. It's a great paper, highly recommended if you want more information. Image quality versus ease of use. And again, these are point of care. They were also imaging the heart and things. I think if you're just talking about musculoskeletal, the Clarius should be somewhere up here. I think the images look just as good as the Vscan Air. So should be up here. But because they were also looking at the heart and things, they end up with a lower score. And I agree with this ease of use that it is buggy. So I agree with its position in this axis. Butterfly IQ is an old unit. I looked through the website and looked through the changes for the Butterfly IQ3, and it definitely looks better. So I added it it should be somewhere here on the chart. But it's still not really good at musculoskeletal. I think in general, particularly the heart images, look fantastic with the Butterfly IQ, or look a lot better. Suresult's D3 Ultra compared to the Butterfly, like things like the heart, it looks a lot worse, but musculoskeletal, much better. But I think on average, it deserves to be sort of here, somewhere here on this graph. So I'm not going to talk about all of these units. At this point, I'm going to stop talking about the Butterfly because I don't recommend it for musculoskeletal. The Clarius I could be used for musculoskeletal. Suresult D3 Ultra, we'll be talking more about that one. The Cosmos, I'm not going to talk about that one because that's not really a wireless handheld. Same thing with the Mindray. Mindray is, again, point of care ultrasound. It's a phased array probe, sector type probe. So I'm basically getting rid of those ones right away. So GE Vscan Air, Philips Lumify, and Clarius, and Suresult D3 Ultra. So we have some pictures here. These three are from the study, and I've added the Suresult D3 Ultra here as a comparison. This is my own neck. So this is the neck region. So this was the Clarius, and I think we can probably agree that the Clarius makes the best image. No surprise. The Chinese one, not bad. Not bad. See some definition in the muscles, can see sort of uniformly into the thyroid. See the vessels. Yeah, not bad. I like it. Actually, I like it more than the Philips. Philips looks really greasy to me, but it might have the specular reduction turned way up, or it might have compound imaging turned up, and both those things can make the image look a little bit greasy like this. But we can identify structures fairly clearly in the Philips. And we have the GE Vscan here, and yeah, that looks fairly clear too. Honestly, in this very specific comparison, the Chinese one, I would say, is number 2. So this is the best, second best, and third best, and maybe fourth best. Now, I'm actually going to, at this point, eliminate the Philips from the running. And that's because it's not wireless. And it's about the same price as getting the GE, and the GE is a double-ended probe. So you get 2 probes for the price of 1. So it just doesn't make sense to me. So the 3 probes we're going to talk from this point on are the Clarius, the Suresult D3 Ultra, and the GE Vscan Air. Okay, the Clarius. Okay, these are very high quality probes out of Canada. 192 elements. They don't say the number of channels, but they do say they use 8 parallel beamformers. Now, what the beamformer is it's the circuitry that creates the beam. So if you have 8 parallel ones, basically you're creating and interpreting the beam in 8 parallel channels. The more parallel channels you have, the better, because it's just a lot of information to process, both to create the beam and to interpret the beam. Probes are about $4,000 plus a yearly $600 subscription. They make very specialized probes. They have an L7, an L15, an L20, a C3, etc. The L7 would be a general purpose linear probe, about 4 centimeters wide, a maximum depth of 11 centimeters. The L15 is a musculoskeletal focused probe. It has a width of 5 centimeters and a maximum depth of 7 centimeters. The L20 is a very small probe. I think the footprint is just 3 centimeters, I think, something like that, but has, of course, a very high frequency. So very, very shallow structures, very high resolution, and then they have a curvilinear, and they have a sector probe, and all sorts of other probes. But for our purposes, you'd probably be interested in one of these 3, and then of course if you wanted to add on a curvilinear for, let's say, the hip, then you'd have to buy the C3. You'd have to buy a whole extra probe. Now, Clarius is the only company making high quality, higher frequency probes. So if you want a wireless probe that has a greater frequency than 13 megahertz, then Clarius is the only game in town. There are some Chinese options, but if you want one of the premium companies, this is the only one. They have almost all the features you could want with subscription. I think the only feature I can't seem to find is extended field of view. Now, everything is automated, which is very convenient. But let's say you want to move the focal point or change the frequency. Well, then sucks to be you. You're just stuck with whatever the unit decides is the best for you, or the best for your presets. Now, and the app has a lot of fancy features. If you pay for the subscription, like voice control, automatic measurements, etc. While scanning, the app is great, but the app can be really buggy. And you can't view cineclips or videos frame by frame when trying to look over completed scans. Like, I think that's a huge omission there. Forced updates. I hate this. I hate grabbing the unit and then it being like, nope, I need to update before you're allowed to scan. Why would you do that? This is medical equipment. You don't want your medical equipment to refuse to work for you. That's just crazy. I've complained about this so often to them, and I think that's why they don't return my emails anymore. The app needs location information. That sucked. I bought an iPad to use with my Clarius, and my iPad didn't have location information. So I had to buy another tablet, and I gave away my iPad. because it needs location data. Why does it need location data? That's stupid. And currently, I don't pay for the subscription for my Clarius unit, but even though I'm not paying for the subscription, it still demands to be connected to the internet regularly. If I don't connect to the internet, it refuses to work. Can you believe that? Now, the cloud software is super buggy. I had to really fight with it to write reports. And despite me complaining for years, they seem uninterested in fixing it. Now, what happens if you don't pay for the subscription? Well, then no split screen, which I think is a requirement, and no saving images. Can you believe that? No saving images. When I bought the Clarius, I paid extra for the subscription, and I actually used the cloud feature and uploaded my scans to the cloud, and I wrote my reports in the cloud software. But when I bought it, saving the images was standard. Like, you didn't need the subscription for that feature, but they changed the terms and conditions. These companies can change the terms and conditions to whatever they want. They can increase the price, they can remove features, and this is a feature they removed. You used to be able to save images without subscription, and they removed that feature. Now you have to pay a subscription to save images. Now, you can get around this by basically print screening, using the screen capture or video capture if you want to record one of your Cineclips. But can you believe that? Can you believe that with medical equipment that you have to document, right? Particularly if you're billing, you have to document, and them saying, no, you're not allowed to document unless you pay us $600 a year. And if you bought it years ago and you thought you could, and then them ripping that feature out of your hands, like they're evil. They're evil. Okay. If you don't pay for a subscription, you lose access to the specific structure presets, which does make the images worse in quality. Remember, everything is automated, so you really need these presets to get the machine to choose the correct focal points and the correct frequency. I still think the Clarius still makes arguably the best images for handhelds, even if you don't have the specific presets. But I have noticed that the images just look worse. Even without the subscription, you still have access to power and color Doppler, and you still have access to spatial compound imaging. So that works for now until they decide to pull those features away from you. Next time they upgrade the terms and conditions, right? The last thing I'll say is it gets really hot, like really, really hot. Like it'll shut itself off, it gets so hot. So you need to buy the optional fan attachment if you intend to scan patients back to back, or if you intend to practice with it. And let's just quickly run through their website. Currently they don't post their prices. They sometimes do, sometimes don't. Here they show that some of their technology for identifying structures, of course, with subscription. Okay, here's again identifying and taking measurements for you. The needle enhance, their needle enhance with beam steering is great. Power Doppler, that you don't need a subscription for that. You need every time there's this symbol, that means you need a subscription for it. Voice controls needs a subscription. Split screen needs a subscription. We have their L15 HD3. This is the one I have. They label that as superficial and small joints. They label the L7 HD3 as deep tissue and joints, right? Because with the L7, you probably have the depth to do most people's hips, for example, where the L15, you can only do skinny people's hips, for example. But the L15 would give you better images for shoulders and hands and elbows and things like that. And you can see sort of the comparison. L15 5 to 15 megahertz, 7 centimeters max depth. And here the L7 4 to 13 megahertz and 15 centimeters max depth. Oh, they changed that. They used to say 11. And you can see sort of the difference in width. Here's the L7 and there's the L15 much wider. And here are some of their sample images. Of course, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sample images because I've been using it for years. And yeah, it takes really, really good images. Now, for more details about some of my complaints, you can check out my review of the Clarius. There's a part 1 and there's a part 2, and I have an hour-long video comparing the D3 Ultra with the Clarius. So now let's talk about Suresult. Suresult is a Chinese company. These are shipped out of China, and I'm actually a little impressed with them because they decided not to just be a factory making them for AliExpress and Alibaba, but they decided to sell them direct. And they've been putting in effort to improve their offerings. In fact, If we scroll down, who's this guy? Who's this loser? So after I wrote a review, and I thought my review was fairly critical, they actually contacted me to give me a discount code and to ask me to create a whole bunch of educational content for them. So to add to their website to make it seem more professional and on par with what Clarius does, right? And if you use my coupon code, you get 11% off. I do think these are a good value. As I mentioned, my review I thought was fairly critical because it does not create the best images. It creates okay images, and if okay images is all you need, and I think okay images are what you need to get started, I think this is a D3 Ultra. I think that's a good buy. So in this example here, if we look carefully, it says frequency 10 megahertz, right? And this is the maximum for the linear side, which is 4 centimeters across. And as I mentioned, max 10 megahertz. And that's a little low for some things. But I find myself grabbing this over my Clarius unless I need something like 15 megahertz worth of detail. Unless I need 5 centimeters thickness of the image. It's just so much faster. I have my tablet set to only auto-connect to the Suresult's Wi-Fi. So I turn this on, open the app, and this is connected. How long does it take to connect to Wi-Fi? It's that amount of time, 5 seconds, and I'm scanning. It's so fast. App is very simplistic though, and I must say the frame rate's not great, and it doesn't have spatial compounding imaging. Other than that, 192 elements, 64 channels, has power Doppler, color Doppler, pulse wave Doppler, will save in a DICOM. I haven't tested that myself, but there is a DICOM option. I save the images as JPEGs, or it saves videos. And it's just been working great. It did have some bugs where if you went split screen, it wouldn't save the pictures. But I complained about it, and they fixed it. As I mentioned, I think they've been putting in extra effort, and they want to sort of enter the world stage. So if we scroll down, some of their offerings here, they do offer high frequency units, which would be very, very shallow. You can see maximum depth, 4 centimeters. So not too deep, 1620 megahertz. This is the dual-ended probe, the D3 Ultra, which is what I bought. And they have a cheaper, older version of this, which instead of 192 elements and 64 channels is 128 elements and 32 channels. And in fact, here we have the options with prices. So their high frequency is 3,000. Again, use my coupon code if you want 11% off. The D3 Ultra is 2,800. Again, minus discount. And they have this cheaper, older version for 1,450. And I already mentioned, don't buy a Chinese 120 element one, 32 channel one. And I'll stand by that. I don't think it's the best for MSK. But if you're, let's say, a sports physician and you're a sideline doc at a sporting event, is this good enough to notice free fluid in the abdomen? Yeah. Could you detect a full tendon tear? Yeah. I think the Clarius can do 90-95% of what a cart could do. I think the D3 Ultra, even though I'm maxed out at that 10 megahertz, I think it can do 90% of what the Clarius could do. And I think this could do maybe 60% of what the Clarius could do, or 50% of what the Clarius could do. It is still useful. There are still diagnoses that you can make, but can you identify a lymph node? Probably not. Can you identify the median nerve? Well, it's going to be tricky. Now, these do have, you can see convex, linear, and phase. They say 3 in 1, but there's only 2 ends of it. Where's the third? Well, what they do is they take the convex, the curve edge, and they just use the elements in the center. If they just use the elements in the center, they can simulate a sector probe. It's just the resolution just sucks on it. And you might as well just leave the convex on and just accept that you're going to hit some of the ribs if you're looking at the heart. Because it's not very good. I've been using it to learn some of the emergency protocols and look at the heart, and it's not great. It's not pretty. Other than that, the convex is pretty good, and actually the linear is very, very decent with that limitation of the 10 megahertz, and with that limitation of no compound imaging. And with that limitation, that's only 4 centimeters wide. So with those limitations, now keep in mind for the 4 centimeters wide, the Clarius L7 is only 4 centimeters wide for the linear portion. Same thing with the GE Vscan Air, only 4 centimeters wide. And this compares well with the L7 and the GE in terms of the linear portion. Both of those go up to, I think, 12 or 13 megahertz, and this only goes up to 10. But again, aside from that one limitation, this produces fairly decent images. And I will say, I think if you're getting into MSK ultrasound, compound imaging does help. It just, well, gets rid of a lot of anisotropy. But I was sort of relying on it. And by losing some of the width here, by losing compound imaging, I found it helpful that I already knew what I was looking for. Like I feel like the learning curve is a lot higher. But by using this unit, it made me a much better sonographer by not relying on technology and actually using anisotropy more to more quickly identify tendons, for example. And I had to be a lot more dynamic with my transducer movement to get rid of anisotropy. So it made me a better sonographer. So steeper learning curve, but you'll be better for it if you learn how to use it on a unit without compound imaging. Some of you who are very, very price conscious right now may be interested in this 1450, and I was looking at it too because I was looking for an additional probe. In particular, I was looking for something with a convex probe so that I could look for more triple A's, look at the hip and things like that. So I wanted something in addition to my Clarius. I didn't know the D3 Ultra was basically going to replace the Clarius for most things I use an ultrasound for. But I was strongly considering this, and then I upgraded to the 192 element D3 Ultra. And in my research, I didn't find a lot of information and a lot of pictures with this, but I think there was one that was quite telling. There was one review that said something along the lines of, way better than the butterfly transducer I bought before, or I was using before. So that tells you that this is actually a great price for what you're getting, because it's even cheaper than the butterfly, which is one of the cheaper options out there. And again, it creates decent images for obvious pathology. And people, 5-10 years ago, before this most recent generation of handheld ultrasounds, there were people using 10 megahertz transducers, 128 element transducers to do musculoskeletal ultrasound. In fact, I remember shopping years ago, again, looking to get into musculoskeletal ultrasound, and there were packages with a 128 element transducer. So it's not impossible. It just limits what you can do. But you can still do a lot. You can still look at the Achilles tendon and diagnose tendinosis or a sizable tear in the Achilles tendon, but you may have difficulty identifying the plantaris tendon, which runs alongside it, for example. Now, the D3 Ultra is what I recommend, what I own. Here's just a quick snapshot of all of its features. I think the weight is actually a little less than the Clarius, despite it being a double-ended probe. And you'll see image enhancement. What's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? Focus 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. What are they talking about? 1, 2, 3, 4 is the settings on the app. Everything goes in increments. You tap the button, it goes up to the next increment. And it really doesn't have any automatic settings. So you have to set everything. Now, it does have presets, which gets you sort of close. I tend to put the gain up to max, but for dynamic range, for the set of focal points, you get 2 focal points on screen and you can press the button to move them around. For the depth setting, in fact, that's probably the biggest complaint about it, is there aren't enough depth settings. You basically have 4 depth settings and you can't, go 1 centimeter at a time. It's something like, 15 centimeters, 10 centimeters, 5 centimeters, 2 centimeters. So it often isn't exactly what you want. Now for MSK, you would think I'd always want the smallest depth, but I go to the second smallest depth because the smallest depth actually cuts the sides of the image off a little bit. So to get the whole width of the transducer, I go with the second deepest depth, even though that gives me excessive depth. There is one mistake on this page, and that is there is no USB connection. It's Wi-Fi. It's completely sealed, which has its benefits and downsides, benefit being that you're less likely to get water in it, right? So it has on-screen measurements, so everything that you need to take the measurements that you want. It does have puncture assist function if you are doing interventional procedures, but this is giving you like a dotted line guide to use, something to aim for. It doesn't actually, from what I can tell, change the direction of the beam. It doesn't use some sort of AI technology to enhance the image. Isn't the same as the needle enhancement of some of the premium companies. This is just a dotted line to aim for, a dotted circle to aim for. As I mentioned, Diacom or local storage without subscription. Local storage without subscription, thank goodness. Now you have very long cine loops if you want. I do not use 1,000 frames, I use 100 frames. Going through the frames is a little awkward. You basically go one frame at a time. Now it does offer split screen. It's this little button here. So it has that feature that we need. You may see here this says compound. So is that compound imaging? I mentioned before that it doesn't have spatial compound imaging, and it doesn't. This is frequency compound imaging. You want to turn this off for MSK because compound imaging is going to reduce the frame rate greatly, and the benefit for MSK isn't worth it. And sadly, it seems to be on by default in the newest update to the app. The other thing about updates to the app, you have to go into the store and manually download the newest version. So it won't interrupt you or stop you from scanning a patient. It really is a very, very simple program. I'll also comment on the button position. It's great for the curvilinear side, but for the musculoskeletal side, the buttons to freeze the image is a little bit too far away. So you either hold it awkwardly or use your second hand. Most of the time, I just keep the screen close by and press freeze on the screen. Now, if you like what you're hearing, then you can check out my hour-long video where I have lots of example scans comparing the Suresult with the L15. So now we get to the Vscan Air by GE. They have two versions. I'm going to talk about the CL version, which is the version with the curvilinear side and the linear side. So let's talk about pricing for the Vscan Air. It's $4,855 right now. Now, with a subscription, this 1 year of innovations, it's $650 more for $5,500. Well, what do you get for the innovations? Well, you get your high definition speckle reduction instead of just normal speckle reduction. So you get their best image processing speckle reduction feature, and you get automatic bladder measurements. But of course, for MSK, we don't really need bladder volume measurements. You also get 2 remote 45-minute sessions. Now, to Clarius's credit, they include a 45-minute session when you buy a Clarius unit, just included in that price. And if you need help, this is why if you buy any of my educational programs, it includes a 45-minute session with me, because I know that many people have questions. How do I get started? What should I do? You know, how do I chart? How do I bill? And so you if you need that help, well, then I include it in my educational programs. You'll contact me and we'll talk. We'll chat. So for the first year, it's $650, and for the subsequent years, you don't get more 45-minute sessions, and I guess they just charge $500 a year for subsequent years. And if you need cloud storage for your images, I believe that's $400 a year. Now, this is one of the places where the GE really shines, is it has these 128 channels, which really helps for information processing, keeping high frame rates, has harmonic imaging, which is more for abdominal imaging than it is for MSK, but that's a nice bonus. And it is impressive what they can do. They call this Signal Max, their signal processing technology, and it really is impressive. For example, the curvilinear actually has less elements than the Suresult, and the Suresult will be higher resolution, but based on these sample images, I would say that the structures look easier to identify. So it's amazing what you can do with it when you have proprietary technology. Speaking of proprietary technology, GE has some of the best speckle reduction technology out there. But you want the newest speckle reduction imaging? They're HD? Guess what? Another subscription. Oh my. For the curved array, it has 128 elements. For the linear array, which is 4 centimeters wide, it's 3 to 12 megahertz with a center frequency of 7.7 megahertz. If you're wondering why the Clarius L7 was called the L7, it's because its center frequency is also around 7 megahertz. Number of elements is 192, so it compares well with the other two. and it says has a maximum depth of 8 centimeters. In terms of imaging modes, B mode, your standard mode, color Doppler, no power Doppler, pulse wave Doppler, we don't really need this or care about this for MSK. Now, color Doppler will show you the direction of flow with the color, and will show you how fast based on how bright the red is and how bright the blue is. Power Doppler just measures whether something's moving or not, and if there's more things moving, then you'll get a larger signal, a brighter signal. So if you just care if there's flow at all, such as in hyperemia for MSK, power Doppler is the way to go, and it's a little bit more sensitive. Of course, you can't use color Doppler if you don't have power Doppler. The app has many presets for different organs. The app is very simple. There aren't actually a lot of options. Everything seems automated. Similar to the Clarius, you need to log in, you need to have your location information turned on, you need to have Bluetooth turned on. None of that is required for the Suresult. You just need to turn on Wi-Fi in your scanning. Some of this you can see might be beneficial for security reasons, for patient identifying information reasons, having scans automatically delete themselves, having your unit automatically log out just in case. It does support DICOM, and it does support local saving. If you want cloud saving, that is an additional subscription separate from the other subscription I talked about before. Now, another feature that's missing is it doesn't have split screen. Ugh. And it doesn't have compound imaging either, although I'd argue that because of its fancy voodoo magic processing, the images look so good you might not need compound imaging. Now, without compound imaging, you do have to manipulate the probe a little bit more to get clear views of things like tendons, but the images just look so good. So here we have an image of the patellar tendon, and I'll grab my 2 units and I'll take pictures so we can compare them. So here we are. Here's the GE below, and here is the Suresult D3 Ultra above. This is my own knee. And we can see the fibers here, we can see the fibers here. I have some anisotropy here. This goes away if I heel toe the transducer. I can make that go away. But yeah, I can see the tendon just fine with the Suresult. And here it is with the GE. Now, if I turn compound imaging on, then I get a more greasy appearance. And I would say it looks better. So even though this is frequency compound imaging, it does make the pictures look better, but it decreases the frame rate. So you can experiment whether you like it or not. Maybe just turn it on for the pictures that you're going to save. If you're doing dynamic imaging, maybe turn it off. You know, it's up to you. You can experiment. It'll be your unit, right? But with compound imaging on, I find that these pictures seem to be fairly comparable. You know, I can see all the fibers. Now let's add the Clarius to the mix, and boy, the Clarius is nice. Even with compound imaging, and it is turned on here, this is spatial compounding, we still get some anisotropy, right? It reduces it, it doesn't necessarily eliminate it, but boy, can we see the definition of the fibers. It's better, right? That 14 megahertz that the other two just can't compare with. So for this particular image, I think this looks the best. I think these two are fairly comparable. Maybe this looks a little bit nicer than this. And here we're comparing the curvilinear sides of the Suresult with the Vscan. And I think the Suresult actually wins here. Like, just look at the higher resolution of the kidney. Now, if we go back to that comparison of the 6 handhelds by POCUS experts, you know, what did they say about the Vscan Air? 71% said good image quality. 66% liked that it was wireless. 60% liked that it was a 2-in-1 probe. 37% said it had an easy-to-use interface. What didn't they like? Some had connectivity issues, 26%. 20% said the images were poor quality, and I must admit they're a little low resolution compared to some other probes. 70% didn't like the probe size or shape. 14% didn't like that there was no continuous wave Doppler. For MSK, we don't need this, so this doesn't affect us. Okay, so if we jump down to the only other one we're talking about is the Clarius here. What do they like about the Clarius? Good image quality. They like that it's wireless. What don't they like? Large probe, 74%. Heat from probe, 54%, poor image quality 17%, multiple probes needed 17%. Here are a few more graphs that I find interesting. Here, number of raters versus the ultrasounds here. Yellow is satisfied, gray is neutral, black is dissatisfied. So you can see with the butterfly, a lot of dissatisfied, very few people were satisfied with that. With the Clarius, yeah, most people were just neutral with. Vscan Air, either neutral or satisfied. This was how they ranked them best to worst. How many times was the Vscan Air ranked number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5? And most people really liked the Vscan Air. And Clarius, they didn't necessarily rate it the worst, but they didn't really like it that much. And this is interesting. Which one would you buy? Which one would you carry in your pocket? No one picked the Clarius, even though most people were dissatisfied with the butterfly. People would choose that over the Clarius, and that could be because this probe is more suited to abdomen scans and cardiac scans. Remember, this is a POCUS study, not an MSK study. Almost everyone wanted a Vscan Air. So here I have some tables. This table here sort of estimates the cost of gain into MSK Ultrasound. The $1,000 is for my own educational program, which also has an optional fellowship or mentorship. If you're interested in certification, like the POCUS Certification Academy certifications, or the RMSK certification from the APCA, or the IANM CNMS certification, they have various costs, textbook, tablet, and stand. I do recommend a tablet, slightly bigger screen, something dedicated for scanning, although of course you can use your phone with all of these handheld devices, and of course the handheld ultrasound unit itself. And here's the table. Let's go through the pros of each. Right. Suresult D3 Ultra, it's 3-in-1, although the phased array mode kind of sucks. It can do 90% of what the L15 can image. Remember, the L15, its advantage is only when it can take advantage of that higher frequency. When you're looking at things that are deeper, the L15 also switches down to 10 megahertz or even lower. So at those lower frequencies, the Suresult or the GE will do just fine in terms of resolution. So the Suresult can do 90% of what the L15 can image. And I'll also mention, for example, the plantar fascia. The linear part of the Suresult, even though the plantar fascia is fairly shallow, it's tough to image through the plantar surface. What option I have with the Suresult is I just flip it over and I use the curvilinear side. Sure, the curvilinear side is a much lower frequency, like we drop all the way down to 5 megahertz, but it's high enough I can still make out the thickness of the plantar fascia and get a measurement. If it's thicker than 4 millimeters, it's plantar fasciitis or plantar fasciosis. And with the increased depth, we can do hip, which the L15 is not great at. We can do the POCUS scans, like the RUSH protocol or the EFAST protocol. The Suresult, the app, we have split screen, yeah. We have power Doppler, color Doppler, pulse wave Doppler. It's the cheapest. It's definitely the fastest and easy. It's really easy to connect to the unit. And you can save images without a subscription. Awesome. Now, what about the Clarius? Well, the highest frequency and widest linear probe, if we're talking about the L15, it is the best handheld for MSK images, particularly of shallow structures. I'm talking about the L15, the L20, less than 3 or 4 centimeters. It just produces beautiful images that units like the GE or the Suresult just can't compare with. It has spatial compound imaging, which reduces anisotropy. Again, you don't need spatial compound imaging. It just makes things easier. It has split screen if you have the subscription. Cloud saving with subscription. Power Doppler is included. Power Doppler and color Doppler is included. Pulse wave Doppler isn't, but MSK, we don't need that. Specific presets if you have the subscription. Trapezoidal imaging is included even if you don't have a subscription. Now, if instead of the L15, if you decide to take the L7 instead, you trade some image width and max frequency for better general usage. Right? So you could image the hip, for example, with the L7. And what about the GE Vscan Air CL? Well, it's a 2-in-1. It can pretty much do 95% of what the L15 can do. And then, of course, you can do the hip and other POCUS protocols like the RUSH or EFAST. GE has the best technology for optimizing images. It will do cloud saving with a special subscription. You can save images without a subscription, and it's rated the best overall POCUS handheld. You know what? I'll add, it has a very simple and easy to use app based on what I've seen in the demonstrations. Okay, now the cons. Well, the cons of the Suresult is it only goes up to 10 megahertz. The app has tons of features, right? But it's unrefined. And nothing's automated. Like, you have to change the frequency. You have to change the focal points. Everything you have to do yourself. And some of these modes aren't quite the best. Needle guidance mode and the phase array mode, they both kind of suck. Now, what about the Clarius? Well, for the L15, you can't image the hip, on large patients. Basically requires a subscription if you want to save, for example. Again, there's a workaround. You can just screen capture. The app and the cloud software is buggy. And there are forced and mandatory updates, requires location, requires mandatory occasional internet connection. What about the GE? Well, some have complained about connectivity issues, location and login required, no power Doppler. Again, you can get by with color Doppler instead of power Doppler. No compound imaging. Again, you can get by without that. No split screen. Oh my goodness. That might be a deal breaker for me. I don't use split screen all the time, but in tricky situations where I'm like, ooh, is this just a strange normal or is this pathology? Boy, do I like split screen. Boy, do I like split screen. So that's a tough call for me. I contacted Clarius and I was like, please, just give me a price. How much to just get split screen? They don't have an option anywhere to like purchase split screen. It's only with the subscription. Just give me a price. And of course, they don't reply to any of my emails. Speaking of prices, we have the Suresult, which is $2,800 right now. And if you use coupon code POCUS11, you get an 11% off discount. The Clarius is $4,200 plus $600 per year for the subscription. Now, the first year is free. It's a little confusing because they say, oh, if you buy the subscription, then we'll make the selling price $600 less. They can just say first year included free. And how much is the GE? Well, it's $4,850 plus somewhere between $500 to $650 per year if you want access to their best speckle reduction technology. And if you need to save images in the cloud, it's an extra $400 per year. So I might have the best combination, or at least the best combination for me. I have the Suresult D3, which will do a little bit of everything. And honestly, I grab it for everything unless something is very, very shallow and I need that high resolution, like let's say the fingers, I'm looking for a ganglion cyst or something. The GE Vscan, they have a sample image of a ganglion cyst. And sure, you can make out the fluid collection, but you can't see its connection to the joint space. You can't see the finger tendons with any detail, really. So if I'm looking at something, for example, the hand or wrist, and I really want that extra detail, I have access to it, although without the presets, it's not as good as it could be. But I hate Clarius, so I'm angry with them, so I never want to give them more money again. So no subscription for me in the future. And of course, the Suresult doesn't require a subscription. I've had some students buy the GE Vscan Air, and they seem happy with it. Just keep in mind, you'll have to do the manual thing where you can still look on the other side, but you might have to flip between images to compare instead of having them both on screen at the exact same time. And you can sort of get a poor man's split screen by taking images of both sides, then going to the gallery, and then both pictures will be side by side. So there's a roundabout way to get split screen. But what about laptop or cart-based models? Because these are going to be better than handhelds. So shouldn't I buy one of these? Well, yes, as I mentioned, the handhelds have their advantage in that they're very convenient and wireless, can put it in your pocket. If you have the money, if I had the money, and honestly, it's not that much money, but if I had the money and if I lived in the States, I would actually have a cart-based model. Guaranteed I would have a cart-based model. And let me elaborate a little bit more about why. Now, in general, the more you pay, the better the image and the more features you get. Very cheap laptop units, in my opinion, aren't worth it. You might as well just stick with your wireless handheld. Now, mid to high-end laptop or portable models from within the last 15 years are totally worth it. They will give you a significantly better image. If you're going to buy used, be very cautious, as there are many eBay postings, for parts. So that tells me that these units break often. Now, new, these units can go, between 15,000 to 50,000. Used, you can find them on eBay, 3,000 to 25,000. Most are around 5 to 10,000. Now, the advantage of a laptop unit is it typically has a battery, so it's more portable. In theory, you could pack it up and put it in your backpack and bring it somewhere, and you get better images than a handheld. So why would you go with a cart then? Are carts worth the extra money? Well, US hospitals will buy new cart-based units every 10 to 20 years. So there is a flood of used and refurbished units out in the market. So you can buy a mid to high-end cart-based system on eBay for so cheap, and there's so many of them. If I could work in the States, I would. I'm Canadian and I'm not allowed to work in the States. I would definitely buy one of these carts. And the reason why I say I would need to be there is because shipping tends to be only within the United States. Even if I had one of these carts, I would still keep a handheld for house calls and for quick everyday scans. I need this information for this diagnosis now. It's in my pocket. It's on the shelf. I don't have to wheel this giant machine room to room. Now, how I practice is I typically try to do my scans as quickly as possible to get enough information to make enough of a diagnosis that I can use the treatment time effectively, right? I'm counting the minutes. Every minute counts. Every 30 seconds counts, which often results in me scanning again the next visit, right? And in general, I scan often to sort of manage to sort of monitor progress of healing. I love to do that in the handheld, just a couple minutes, and I can get some information and keep myself updated how things are going. But sometimes I switch to, I'm not a radiologist, but I switch to radiologist mode. Okay, I am going to do the darned best scan I can. I'm going to scan every structure. I'm going to take all the pictures. I'm going to use power Doppler and everything. I'm going to write the most beautiful report, and I'm going to bill insurance. Yeah, when I'm scanning someone every visit, I typically don't bother billing insurance, and also they won't pay for subsequent scans. They typically will only pay for the first diagnosis scan. But if I have my hat on, my radiologist cap on, or sonographer cap on, and I am going to do a radiologist level scan, and it's going to be a significant part of my time, I'd love to have one of these machines. Imagine wheeling this in, and again, you're getting the best image. So if they go to the hospital, you can guarantee that they're not going to get better images than you can produce in your office. And that's one of the downsides of the handheld, as I showed you, that handhelds are close, but they're not as good as cart-based models. So there might be things you miss, and they might have to get subsequent imaging. If you have a cart-based model, as long as you're skilled enough, they don't have to get subsequent ultrasound imaging. You have the best images at your fingertips. I would love to have a cart-based model. Now, new cart-based models, $40,000 to $150,000. Most are over $100,000. Used, you'll see them used $3,000 to $50,000, and most are $5,000 to $12,000. Oh, they're so cheap, and there's so many GE Logic P6s. The GE Logic series is the sort of general use ultrasound machines. Those would make an excellent choice, and for these prices, they often will include probes. Now, sometimes they come with the probes you want, and sometimes not, and sometimes the probes, they might be damaged, right? Or they might not last very long because they might be used. Keep in mind, these high-end probes are $3,000 to $5,000 on their own. So they're basically the same price as a wireless probe, maybe even more. So factor that into the cost of buying one of these. Like, you're saving so much money. If you end up having to buy a new probe or two, in my mind, that's fine. Remember, you're paying, even if you're paying $12,000, you're paying $12,000 for something worth $100,000. And something giving you the highest quality images. Like, imagine being able to have an MRI machine in your office for just a fraction of the cost. In my mind, it's no brainer. I don't know why more people don't do what I have in my head, and I would do it if I was in the States. Keep in mind, these cart-based units are big and heavy, and so shipping can be like $1,000. So I've only used cart-based units and handheld ultrasounds. I have not used a laptop type machine before, and so I don't really have a lot of feedback. But I thought I'll steal some information from SMUG, Sports Medicine Ultrasound Group from the UK. This article, blog post that they wrote, it's a few years old now, so the units are a little out of date. But here's a list of some units that they recommend. In their in-person courses, they have a whole bunch of GE Logic E's. They have a whole bunch of these, and that's what they teach with. Again, I wouldn't recommend the list on the left, but this list on the right, I would recommend. Now I'm going to pick on GE, but you could pick another company to search for. And let's look at prices. So we have a GE Logic P6 refurbished, about 6,000. Vivid T8. Vivid is the cardiovascular series. And this is a more recent version, 9,000. Voluson, this is obstetrics, 11,000. Vivid cardiovascular. So you can use cardiovascular for MSK, that's fine. We have another Logic P6. This one with a curvilinear probe and a linear probe, tested, $6,000, $600 delivered to your clinic, and away you go. Here's a GE Logic with the 12L RS probe. This is a very common probe. It comes with a cart and everything, $5,000 plus a little bit of shipping. Here's a GE Logic E9, so this is a much more recent unit, but no probes. Here's another GE Logic S8 with 2 probes. And one of them is a linear, and so you can use that right there. And it comes with a curvilinear and a linear, and away you go. And these Logic P6s are really, really, top tier. Even though they're 15 years old now, they are still top tier units. Like the technology that's built into these things, you just can't have in a handheld unit. Let's just look at what they say about image quality. Right? You have phase inversion harmonics, not just even normal harmonics, phase inversion harmonics. We have cross beam. This is their spatial compound imaging. You have the SRI HD. If you remember their handheld, that was a $500 a year subscription to get that feature built in. Unique coded technologies. Now that's really cool. Instead of sending out basically beeps of sound, it sends out like a word. And so it's listening for that word to come back. So it won't mistake that signal coming back for another signal or for noise. I think that's pretty cool. And of course, it'll have extra features like extended field of view. It'll have your split screen. It'll have colorized image. This is where they just make the whole screen, orange or green, because our eyes are better at picking up colors than black and white. Be cautioned that not all units have all features. Sometimes you have to buy additional packages. I think the elastography requires an additional package be purchased to have access to that. And let's just talk about some of the newest models, just briefly. So Probomedical, musculoskeletal, sort by popularity. And let's just look at what's out here. So we have a GE Logic laptop model. We have the Versana. This is their primary care model. The Venue is their point of care model. They have different series depending on the name. Remember, Logic is the jack of all trades. Versana, so it's primary care, primary care, primary care. We have Chison, a Chinese company. I hear some of their models actually produce pretty darn good musculoskeletal images. Acusun is another company you have to keep in mind. GE, another Logic. Mindray is another Chinese company, which is a bit more economical in terms of price, just like Chison. So I guess in conclusion, I wish I had a decent handheld wireless, and I wish I had a cart-based unit. And I'm not sure what you need for your clinic or what you want. But I hope you found this information useful, and I wish you the best of luck in getting into ultrasound. Cheers.